Hi there, welcome to our tutorial on how to use Dataset and Big Local News to access the Stanford School Enrollment Project data. So first off, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Cheryl Phillips. I'm the director of Big Local News. And with me here is Simon Willison, who is the founder of Dataset, which is a tool to help you analyze and explore data, and you'll be able to do that with this school enrollment data. So what is the school enrollment data? It's a project that we launched about 6 months or so ago when we wanted to try to track the impact of COVID on public schools, something that's been really hard to do. So we partnered with news organizations, the New York Times, EdSource in California, and the Colorado Cooperative CoLab in Colorado, which represents a lot of local newsrooms. We spent a lot of time collecting, putting in public records requests and just scraping data from every state that we could get it, the local school enrollment at both the school level and the district level. So we have 33 states worth of enrollment data, and not just the number of students, but also wherever possible, the demographics like race and ethnicity, English language learners, poverty measures, and things like that. So you can access this data at Big Local News. You'll see that in front of us, there's a screen. This is the platform, the Big Local News platform. All you have to do to log in is use a Gmail address and you'll have an account. Big Local News has a lot of open data that we keep in our platform, and you can feel free to explore that. But we're going to go directly to the Stanford School Enrollment Project, which is our most recent open data project. And you can see here that in the project itself, there are a lot of files. There is one file for every single state. It has the state abbreviation. So ID is Idaho, IN is Indiana, and so on. And you can just click on the download button and download that CSV, which stands for comma separated values. Basically, it's spreadsheet-like data. And you can download it, open it up, and start to analyze it. The thing is, some of these states are quite large, and analyzing it in Excel might be a little difficult. So the nice thing about this project is that you can also really easily open it up in Dataset. Now, at Big Local, you can actually open up any file in Dataset by selecting this button, but for this particular project, Simon has built a specific spot and built out some kind of canned or pre-run queries to make it even easier. And the link for that is right here at the bottom of it's in this kind of description spot. And so you can just go right to that link. You can copy and paste it to the Dataset. Right here it says enrollment-project Dataset.io. And that's where we're going to go and start exploring this data. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let Simon start, and we'll get going with sharing with discovering what's available in this data.
Okay, so this is the Dataset instance that you'll have the link to. This exposes all of the data from the Big Local project. And really, there are two key tables here to look at. There's a table of enrollments and a table of districts. So we'll take a look at enrollments. This in Big Local, this is a file called schools.csv. You can see this is a pretty big file. This is 3.3 million rows of data. And so Dataset will give you an interface that lets you look at these rows, which isn't particularly interesting. But where things get fun is when you start querying and filtering this data. Very important with this project to understand what each of these rows mean. So a row in this CSV file, a row in this originally in the spreadsheet, tells you the numbers of enrollments across multiple different demographics and different categories of students, but each row represents a single school in a single year, in a single grade, and sometimes a single term as well. So these 3.3 million rows represent data across the period of time from 2015 to 2021 across schools and grades all the way across the country. So what we're going to do is we're going to start using a feature in Dataset called faceting to start trying to make sense of these 3 million rows of data. So I'm going to facet by year, which will show me that in this data, we've got 837,000 records for 2021, and this many for 2020, and so on and so on. I'm going to facet by state, and this will show.
So Simon, can we go through the faceting process again, just quickly? So one of the things about Dataset that is so great is you can facet, but what you do is you click on that little gear circle, right, to facet.
Yep. So you click on the gear circle, you click facet by this, and this will start slicing up that data. So this state one is really interesting because it shows that we have 630,000 records connected in New York, 300,000 in California, 257,000 in Missouri. And for this project, we've been doing a lot of work with Colorado. So I'm going to click on Colorado here, which will filter me down to just the 92,000 rows that we have that are reports from schools in Colorado. Now, furthermore, we've got facet by year. I can see that we've got about 13,000 records per year from 2015 through 2021. And I can dig into those if I click 2020. Now I'm just seeing reports from schools in Colorado in the year 2020. But again, each of these rows doesn't yet represent a single school. It's still divided up by grade. So if we click facet by grade, now I'm seeing that in Colorado in the year 2020, we have 1,100 reports for grade 5 and 1,104 reports for grade 2 and so forth. Now, there is...
Simon, I mean, one of the real things to know about this data is that it's super easy to double count. And so
absolutely. And this is one of the big risks when you're working with this data is you do need to understand what each row represents, because if you don't, you risk potentially double count. You might count all of the students across like all of the grades when you intended to count just the students one specific grade or vice versa. There's actually a grade called PK12 total, which is a combination row. This is if you select this grade, you'll get numbers that represent the students in pre-kindergarten through grade 12. So a lot of the time when you're analyzing this data, you'll want to select for just these reports that are for the PK12 total grade here.
And in some states, so in Colorado, it's PK through 12, but in some states, it's kindergarten through 12. So that's another thing that you might want to know about.
And that's there's very detailed documentation available with this data. You should absolutely make sure you familiarize it with that. So we'll be making sure to include things like which states use which abbreviations for the grades and so forth in that data there.
Can we look at kindergarten? Because I know that's been a big issue with enrollments. How many kindergarten students ended up leaving school during the pandemic?
Let's do that. So we'll start by looking at this view. View here shows us that we actually have pre-kindergarten, we have records for kindergarten full day, and we have records for kindergarten half day. So I'm going to select into Colorado kindergarten full day in the year 2020. And at this point, a useful thing that we can start doing is start to analyze this using custom SQL queries. So right now I've got a view which is showing me Colorado in 2020 for kindergarten full day. If I click view and edit SQL, it will actually show me the SQL query that is being used to generate that data.
That can look really intimidating. That's a lot of code.
Absolutely can. And if you know SQL, you're welcome to start diving in here and doing your own analysis. But one of the things we're providing with this data is pre-written SQL queries for you that will do some of the most important analyses that you might need to pull off. So here's one that we prepared earlier. What I'm doing here is I'm saying for the state of Colorado and the grade kindergarten half day, show me the total enrollments grouped per year. So this is showing me that in 2015, there were 17,100 total enrollments. 2016, 17, 18, 19, 2020, and then 2021. And we can actually draw a chart of that. I'm going to say I want a bar chart showing total enrollments in kindergarten half day per year. Something clearly interesting is happening here in Colorado. But this is the data for half day. If we edit this query up here and say, you know, we want full day instead.
Because that was the biggest category. There's not so many in half day. Well, it really dropped off. So So you're going to want to know that context of
And
what
we'll note
happened.
that full day actually looks very, very different. So full day, we've got a jump from 2009 to 2020, and then a much smaller drop from 2020 to 2021.
But that jump corresponds with when half day dropped in Colorado. So clearly something happened with half day kindergarten and full day kindergarten in earlier years, which is good historical context to have before you report on how many kindergartners got lost during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
One of the things I think about with this data and really any data is that you want to make sure you use this as a tip sheet to figure out where your reporting is going to be. But then you want to make sure you call the school officials and folks in whatever communities you're going to be reporting this out in to vet and verify everything.
And I think especially because this data, as you've already seen, there's quite a lot of subtleties to the way this is organized. Anytime you see something interesting like that, it's always worth doing some more clicking around and exploring into the data, in this case for Colorado kindergarten full day for certain years, just to make sure that you're not accidentally double counting things, or there aren't any sort of weird issues with that data that might not be visible when you're looking at it from a higher level like we are here.
You know, it occurs to me though, one of the other things that we would probably want to do with this data is actually do some math on it. I would love to know the percentage change over time, well, especially from 2020 to 2021.
So this is a very important thing to be able to do. It is possible to do this using SQL queries. It's really hard. It took us several hours the other day of digging around to figure out the best way to do this. So what we've done here is we've prepared some of those queries for you so that you can reuse the work that we've already put in to start exploring this. And this is on the school's database page. We have a list of these queries that you can execute. So we'll start with this one here. This is a relatively simple one called grades by year for states. And so here I can put in a state like Colorado, and we'll
can you explain what you have here that says query parameters?
Yes, so these the query parameters are things that you can enter, which will then be stuck in as inputs to the SQL query. So in this case, we've got a SQL query which is quite complicated, and at the very end it says, oh, and where state equals colon state and term equals colon term, those are the parameters that you can provide. So for Colorado, we're going to put in CO for the state of Colorado. And this is now showing us for all of the grades that we have in the data, so kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then for all of the years that we have records for, what are those totals? So in Colorado, in 2015, the total enrollments for kindergarten half day were 17,100, and then pre-kindergarten, kindergarten full day, and so forth. And then you'll notice right at the very end, we've got a total for 2020, a total for 2021, and then we've calculated the percentage change between those 2 years as this last column. So this column here starts telling you the story about the last 12 to 24 months of numbers that we've got collected here. And again, we can do this as a chart. So I can say, show me a bar chart with the grade against that percentage change. And you straight away see that there were some enormous dips in kindergarten. This is the kindergarten half day number that we were looking at earlier.
And I believe that had something to do with the fact that how Colorado handled kindergarten just as a whole pre-pandemic. But it's, again, something you're going to be wanting to report out. As a reporter, for me, I think taking a look at that kindergarten full day at that 8% drop, which is the more typical kindergarten kind of grade that you have. And I'm not sure if it's required for Colorado. I think it is. That's the one where you really want to take a look at what's going on, I think.
It's worth mentioning right now why we have term as one of the parameters here, because this is something which is easy to get caught out with this data. In a small number of states, the data actually was captured twice over the course of a year. We have reported numbers for both the spring term and the fall term for, I think those states are Georgia and Louisiana. And again, the documentation that accompanies this project, you can always check back to that for those details. So if we were to look at Georgia, we'd actually wouldn't get any results at all unless we specify the term. So let's specify the spring term in Georgia. And now this is showing us those numbers and giving us that, that information for the state of Georgia. And if you wanted to, you could compare the spring numbers with the fall numbers. I don't know if you'd find anything interesting in that, but it's always fun to be able to make those kinds of comparisons, just to get a better understanding of how the data works.
Well, and you could, I mean, for Georgia and Louisiana, it's just the two states, but that would probably be something you might want to look at it if there was any kind of depreciable drop just from the fall to the spring in the pandemic year, like kind of interesting.
So we've got some other, we call these, we've got other canned queries that we've prepared for you. Let's take a look at the race and ethnicity numbers. And again, we'll do this. This is, as you can see, a very complicated SQL query, which you don't have to write, which is always good news. So for this, I'm going to look at Colorado for grade, let's do grade 4. I'll run this, and this is now telling me that in grade 4 in Colorado, these numbers with zeros in mean that the Colorado data that we've collected didn't include numbers for these demographic groups. And that's actually, you'll notice that sometimes that's because some states use Asian and Native American Alaskan Native, other states might use Native American and Native Hawaiian. They might divide their numbers into in different ways.
Right, and we didn't really adjust those, right? We wanted to protect the veracity of the data as it came from those various states, and so we kept their classifications and just included it in the data set for you to be able to explore.
But again, this is, and actually I'll turn on a chart again. I'll do a chart of the column against the percentage change. So here we go. This is showing us that in the state of, in this case, Colorado in grade 4, these were the changes that we saw in those reported demographic groups. And we have a very similar query to this for we've got one for gender. So reported gender groups, we have one for reported economic groups as well. So we call those income proxies. And so income proxies are things like free and reduced meal plan.
Yep.
People reported homeless and reported low income. And again, let's see if we've got these for Colorado for PK-12 total. Oh, we don't have those for Colorado. Or California, unless California is a K-12 total.
It's a K-12. So that's, again, where you see a difference. If it may just be that we either have K-12 or PK through 12. And that changes depending on the state. And then the README will tell you what your state, if you're looking at a particular state, has. So.
And so here we go. For New York, which is a PK-12 total state, we do have reported numbers for that low income column. Something I should mention while we're talking about these numbers, if you look at the columns in this spreadsheet, in the original spreadsheet, you'll see that we have columns called things like white, black, Hispanic, Native American. And then we also, if you scroll over here, have the same columns with INT at the end. So male int, female int. INT, that's a software term for integer. The reason we've done this is that some of the reported figures from the states aren't numbers. In particular, if we look at data from Texas, let's do state, facet by state, I'm going to select Texas. Texas are doing something that they're masking some of those figures. So when we look at these numbers, you'll see things like
the less than sign.
You know what, I'm going to say, show me the ones where the total starts with that less than sign.
Yeah.
So here we go. We've got 14,000 reports from Texas where the total was reported as something like less than 10, less than 40, less than 70.
And let me jump in here for a second, because this is a very important point. Texas in particular, but a few other states as well, use masking to protect the privacy of small, if the classes are small. A couple of states, Texas being one of them, also uses complementary masking, which means that it's masked even at the school level, sometimes even at the district level. In general, if you want more of this kind of demographic data, looking at the district files will be more useful for you, because you might see more masking at the school level files. So that's just an important thing to know.
And then, so the key thing to understand when you're looking at this is anytime you want to add numbers together or order by numbers, you should be using these underscore int columns. So you should sort by the white int column or the Hispanic int column. But be aware that you need to be aware of these differences because, you know, if you're reporting on Texas, you need to know that this data masking has happened. So comparing numbers from Texas with numbers from other states might not make sense because those numbers have been reported differently. Again, we're trying to make sure that you have the original sort of raw data that we got from the states, but also give you this sort of more useful and processed versions that you can start running arithmetic against and so forth.
You know, one other thing, well, actually, did you want to go through any of the other canned queries, Simon, that might be useful for folks to see?
Yeah, what we've mentioned the districts file a couple of times. This is that raw interface into districts. So this may actually be more useful for your reporting than the individual school numbers, especially since the way that the masking has been applied differs for the differences. Again, consult the documentation that comes with the project for the sort of the raw details of how all of that has worked. But when we look at these, when you look at the canned queries, each of these queries has a equivalent that's a district query. So we have the race and ethnicity by year for state and grade by district, which will give you numbers that are pulled from that other source of data that we've collected. And again, I'll do Colorado PK-12 total, and this will show me, according to the numbers reported at district level, what were those totals and what was the percentage change between 2020 and 2021?
And we can see that one of the patterns that we see in Colorado is that there was a pretty significant drop in Native American students over the course of the pandemic, followed by whites, and then a much smaller drop percentage-wise. Now, the key thing to remember, though, is that the numbers, you can see a big percentage change with small numbers. So you want to make sure you're taking that into account in your reporting. So the raw numbers for the Native American difference between 2020 and 2021 is relatively small, but for a smaller population, it could still be an important story.
And there's a great example here. Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander went up by 0.8%, so it increased, but actually that only represents a change of 20 individuals. So, so that's a much, those numbers are very easily skewed by the fact that that there's such small populations.
Exactly. Yeah. If I wanted, so I know that from the Big Local News platform, I can download each file and I can download the entire district file or the entire schools file, but I can also download the data right here from Dataset.
Absolutely. So Dataset will let you slice and dice the data in various ways. So I'm going to jump into just say, let's do Arizona for where grade equals, I'm going to do grade 10. So this is showing me here 8,500 rows. If I click on the advanced export here, I can ask for a CSV file and I can say stream all of the rows. Without that, you'll just get the 100 on this page. If you select this option, you get all of them. So if I click that button, I'll get back a CSV file of those school enrollments in Arizona for grade 10 as a file, which I can then open up in Excel or import into other systems. And this will work for basically anything that you can see in the Dataset instance, you can then export out as data. Another crucially important thing with this is that everything here is linkable. So if you've found something interesting on this page and you want to show it to a coworker, just copy and paste that URL at the top and share that in an email or a Slack message. And when they click that link, they will see the same thing that you're looking at here. That actually works even for charting options. So if I say, and this is not a great page to demonstrate this on, but if I pull up a chart like this, I can share that, share the link there. And when they click that, they'll see the table with the chart that I've created embedded as well.
This is one of my most favorite things, that you can just easily share the analysis. That's just a great feature, I think. So
it also works for SQL queries. If you're a SQL person and you write a really cool SQL query, sharing the link to that, copying and pasting the URL to somebody else will let them rerun that SQL query that you just ran and see those results too. And that's how we plan to share a lot of the story recipes that we've been building for this. Those will be links which you click, and they might just be a SQL query which you can then customize.
That's right. And you know, we've shown you some of the canned queries. We expect to continue to develop even more queries out so that when you come back to this site, you might find some other interesting ways to delve into the data. So we hope this will be useful for you, and you can always reach out to biglocalnews@stanford.edu if you have any questions. Thank you, Simon.
Oh, thanks a lot.